There are moments that split your life into two halves before and after. For me, it happened on a sunlit June afternoon in 1968 in the heart of Greenwich, Connecticut. The church bells had just struck 12. I was standing at the back of the sanctuary, veil in place, bouquet trembling in my hands, heart pounding in anticipation. But when the organ music started, he wasn't there. My groom, the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, never walked through those doors. That was the moment my life changed, but not in the way I imagined. My name is Donna Thomas. I'm 75 years old now. I live in the same weathered cottage my parents left me decades ago, nestled just off Maple Lane near the edge of town. The wood creaks when the wind pushes through, and the garden needs more care than I can give it some days. But it's home. It always has been. It's where I raised my daughter, Emily, and where I've spent quiet mornings baking cinnamon scones for the neighbors' kids. Around here, folks call me Grandma Donna, the woman with the warm smile, a tin of cookies, and stories that somehow always reach your heart before your ears. But very few know the full story of how I became her. You see, there was a time when I wasn't this calm, silver-haired woman with laugh lines and a slow, steady wisdom. There was a time when I was just a girl named Donna Lee Thomas, a hopeful, wide-eyed 21-year-old, ready to begin a life with her high school sweetheart, Alan Brooks. That summer, we were supposed to start everything together: marriage, a little house on Elmridge Road, Sunday dinners, children. Instead, I was left with silence, shame, and 100 unanswered questions. People often ask me why I never remarried, why I chose to raise a child on my own, why I stayed in Greenwich when the whole town had watched me fall apart. My answer: because the fire that nearly destroyed me also forged me into someone new. It's easy to assume life breaks us when things go wrong, but I've learned something different over these long years sometimes. What feels like the end is just the beginning. Sometimes, the worst betrayal becomes the very soil where something beautiful takes root. At 75, I've lived through heartbreak, disappointment, grief, and loss. But I've also lived through hope, healing, and extraordinary love, the kind that doesn't arrive wrapped in lace or flowers, but that builds itself slowly over time, moment by moment, hand in hand. That's what I want to tell you about. Not just the day Alan didn't show up, not just the tear-streaked walk down the church steps in front of 200 stunned guests, but everything that came after the years that shaped me, the people who saved me, and the daughter who taught me that family isn't always born. Sometimes it's built. This story isn't about vengeance. It's not even about regret. It's about truth and forgiveness. And the quiet, unexpected ways life invites us to begin again. So, if you've ever been left behind, if you've ever had to find your way forward when the path vanished beneath your feet, then maybe, just maybe, this story is for you. I'm not sure where to begin, so I suppose I'll start with the blue sky. June 12th, 1968. The weather was perfect, not too hot, just a soft breeze through the trees and enough sunshine to light up the white petals of the daisies tied to the pews. My mom had worked tirelessly on the garden that week, and the scent of lilac still drifted through the air when I stepped into my wedding dress. I remember it all so clearly, every button, every glance, every hope stitched into satin and lace. My bridesmaids Carol, Linda, and Jean buzzed around me, adjusting the veil and triple-checking my makeup. My older sister Carol smiled and said, You're the most beautiful bride this town's ever seen." My father just stood there, quietly proud, nervously folding and unfolding his handkerchief. I was so sure, so ready, so in love. Alan had proposed just a few months earlier, after returning from basic training. He wasn't stationed overseas, just doing administrative work stateside, but he came back looking older, more certain. He gave me a ring that once belonged to his grandmother, plain, elegant, and full of meaning. I wore it like a promise etched in gold. He was the kind of boy every girl wanted, charming, kind, good with kids. He'd pick me up in his sky blue Ford, sing along to the radio, and kiss my hand when he dropped me off. We'd been sweethearts since our junior year of high school, and people around town used to say we were meant to be. I believed them until the moment I didn't, and that's where this story truly begins. It was 11:15 a.m. when my father pulled up the old Chevrolet, polished until it gleamed like silver under the morning sun. White ribbons fluttered from the antenna, and tiny tissue paper bells swung with each bump in the road. The neighbors waved as we passed. Mrs. Bennett from across the street even wiped a tear from her cheek. Everyone loved a good wedding in Greenwich, and mine had been the talk of the town for weeks. Carol and the girls rode ahead in my mother's station wagon, their pale blue dresses shimmering like sea glass in the rear-view mirror. I sat beside my father, bouquet in hand, staring out the window at a world that felt so perfectly in order. Nothing felt off. Not yet. My father glanced over as we approached the church. "You still have time to back out, kiddo," he said gently, but his tone was serious. I laughed, brushing a speck of lint from his shoulder. "Daddy, I love him." He didn't smile, just nodded once, his hands tightening on the wheel. When we pulled into the church driveway at 11:45, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from joy. This was it. This was the beginning of everything I'd ever dreamed about. My whole life had been leading to that moment. Inside, the First Baptist Church was glowing. Sunlight spilled through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in shades of ruby and gold. Over 200 guests filled the sanctuary, friends and family from all over Fairfield County. The daisies lining the aisles matched the ones in my bouquet, my favorite flower. Everything was exactly as I'd planned. I waited in the small anteroom near the altar, a space I'd only seen in wedding magazines. The smell of furniture polish and fresh flowers filled the air. My heart was fluttering. I glanced at the tiny watch pinned to my bouquet, a gift from Alan the week before. It read 11:47, 13 minutes to go. From the window, I could see people laughing softly, turning in their seats, fixing their corsages. The organist flipped through her music. My mother was helping guests find their seats, her pearl necklace glinting as she smiled with pride. She had sewn my wedding dress by hand, staying up nights for weeks. It fit perfectly, the satin soft and cool against my skin, the veil resting just so across my shoulders. I felt like I belonged in a storybook. Then I heard Linda's voice, low, hurried. "Has anyone seen Alan at first?" I thought nothing of it. He was probably outside, adjusting his tie, or maybe talking to Reverend Hughes. He'd had a small bachelor gathering the night before, nothing wild, just Mike Jennings and a few close friends. Maybe they lost track of time. Maybe they stopped for coffee. That's what I told myself. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over. At 11:55, Reverend Hughes came in. His face was unreadable. "Donna," he said, "it seems Alan is running a little late. Nothing to worry about, I'm sure." I nodded. He'll be here. By 12:10, the whispers began. At 12:20, Mike Jennings' wife came into the room. Her face was pale, her voice unsteady. Mike didn't come home last night. I remember staring at her as if she were speaking a foreign language. It didn't compute. I couldn't make it make sense. At 12:30, Reverend Hughes suggested we delay the ceremony. These things happen, he said gently. We'll give it a bit more time. I sat frozen in that little room, fingers clenched around my bouquet. I could hear the shifting in the pews, the murmurs growing louder. I watched my father pace just outside, peering again and again down the street, waiting for the glint of Alan's blue Ford at 1 Cerriero P. Mrs. Brooks. Alan's mother burst into tears in the front row. Something must have happened to them, she cried. My Alan would never do this, but he had. He did. Shortly after 1:15, Mr. Brooks returned from Alan's apartment. His things are gone. He whispered to my father. Some clothes missing. Drawer emptied. That's when I knew. That's when the fairy tale shattered. The bank called later that day. Alan's and Mike's joint savings account had been emptied the morning before. No word, no explanation, just vanished. I don't remember much of the moments that followed, only that Reverend Hughes stood before the guests and announced that the wedding would not be taking place. Please keep Donna and both families in your prayers, he said. People filed out in silence. Some offered awkward hugs. Others couldn't look me in the eye. I stood there in my wedding dress, alone in the little anteroom, as the laughter and conversation faded into a hushed nothingness. My mother's friends quietly took down the decorations, packed up the food in foil trays. My bouquet wilted in my hands. I didn't take the dress off. I couldn't. I sat on my bed that night, still wearing it, makeup smudged, veil askew, like a ghost haunting her own past. That evening, Sheriff Ray Donovan came by with news. Alan's car had been found parked near the Greyhound station in Stamford. An attendant remembered selling 2 tickets to New York City paid in cash. They planned it. Donna, the sheriff said quietly, hat in hand. They left of their own choosing. He didn't say what I knew. There was no crime in leaving someone at the altar. The only crime was what he did to my heart. I cried until there were no tears left. My mother sat beside me in silence, brushing the hair from my forehead like I was a little girl again. Why, Mama, I whispered over and over. What did I do wrong? But she had no answers, and neither did I. The days that followed passed in a blur of muted light and muffled voices. I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. Every time I even thought about stepping outside, my chest tightened. My parents fielded phone calls from relatives and friends, some expressing concern, others pretending to check in just to satisfy their curiosity. My father unplugged the phone by the 3rd day. He'd never been an emotional man, but he took up station in the living room like a guard dog, staring into the quiet, helpless to fix what had broken. I stayed in my childhood bedroom, the lace wedding dress finally folded away and stuffed into the closet like a shameful secret. My mother had offered to pack it for me, but I'd refused. Somehow, putting it away with my own hands felt like accepting what had happened, and I wasn't ready. The whispers around town spread like wildfire. In Greenwich, people pretended to be discreet, but their words clung to my skin every time someone mentioned the weather a little too cheerfully or avoided meeting my eye at the grocery store, at Millie's Cafe. The same table of women who used to wink and call me the lucky bride now went silent when I walked in, their smiles stiff as pressed linen. I had no appetite. I lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. My skin went gray. My eyes, once full of spark, looked hollow even to me. And the worst part, I couldn't stop blaming myself. Maybe I had been too excited, too eager, too naive. Maybe Alan had seen something in me that made him run. The questions spun like a carousel in my head, one that never stopped turning. And then the letter arrived. It was postmarked from Manhattan and addressed in Alan's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. I hoped foolishly, desperately for an apology, an explanation, even a crumb of remorse. But what I got was something colder than silence. Donna, by the time you read this, I'll be starting my new life. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused, but I couldn't go through with a marriage that would trap us both in that small town forever. I hope someday you'll understand that I did this for both of us. Alan. No. I still care about you. No, I'll always love you. Not even goodbye, just a cold, calculated note that stank of cowardice. I walked straight to the kitchen sink, struck a match, and watched that letter curl into ash. My mother stood in the doorway, watching, silent. That was the first decision I made as the new me. I said aloud, not to her, but to the quiet space between us, the version of me that doesn't wait around for answers that may never come. Still, knowing something in your head doesn't make it easier for your heart. For months, I drifted. I kept to myself, declining invitations, letting friendships fade. The world continued turning, and I couldn't understand how. Summer passed, then fall. The trees in Greenwich turned the most brilliant shades of fire amber, gold, crimson, but I barely noticed. My life had gone grayscale. One morning in October, my mother pulled open my bedroom curtains without knocking. Sunlight flooded the room, and I flinched. Mrs. Whitman from the elementary school called. She said they need a secretary. She thought of you. I rolled over, burying my face in the pillow. I'm not ready. You'll never be ready if you wait to feel ready, she said. Sometimes, Donna, you do the thing first, and the readiness comes after. She stood there a moment longer, then left. Her words lingered. The next day, I found myself walking through the front doors of Greenwich Elementary with a resume in hand and a heart still bruised. Mrs. Whitman, the principal, was an old friend of my mother's. She greeted me with her usual no-nonsense charm. I'm not hiring you because I feel sorry for you, she said. I'm hiring you because you're good at what you do, and because I know dignity when I see it. I nodded, trying to hold back the emotion pressing against my throat. The first week was excruciating. Parents registering their kids would glance at me, do a double take, and quickly compose themselves, offering polite smiles full of pity. I hated it. Every time someone called me Miss Thomas, with that tone, that "oh, you poor thing" tone, I wanted to disappear. Mrs. Whitman must have seen it. People forget their own curiosity when met with dignity. She told me one afternoon, as I struggled to hold my head up, look them straight in the eye. So I did. It wasn't easy, but slowly, painfully, I built a new routine. Up at 6, coffee with my parents, work from 8 to 4, dinner at 6, dishes by 7, then long evenings reading on the porch while the world quieted down. It wasn't living, not yet, but it was something. It was survival. And in some small way, it was forward motion. Then came January, and with it, the storm. They called it the coldest winter Greenwich had seen in 40 years. The pipes in our house froze twice. The schools closed for nearly a week. And when the ice storm hit, power went out across entire neighborhoods. Our next-door neighbors, the Harrises, both in their 70s, were suddenly without heat. Mr. Harris had heart problems. His wife banged on our door in a panic, crying that he couldn't breathe. The roads were slicked with ice, phones were down, and no ambulance could reach us. Without thinking, I layered every coat and scarf I could find and set out on foot through the storm. Dr. Nolan Barrett lived 3 blocks away. It felt like walking through a frozen tunnel, wind biting my face, ice clinging to my eyelashes. I slipped twice. Once, I fell so hard I thought I might break my ankle, but I got up. By the time I reached Dr. Barrett's home, my lips were blue and my hands numb, but I got him there in time. He stabilized Mr. Harris right in our living room. Later, he told me flat out, "You saved that man's life. Donna, you've got grit. Ever think about Nursing Hospital in Stamford's starting a new program this spring?" Nursing. The idea seemed ridiculous, but that night, wrapped in 3 blankets with hot tea in my hands and my mother's quiet pride across the room, something shifted in me. Helping the Harrises had been the first time in months I'd felt anything other than sorrow. And maybe that was the point. I didn't give Dr. Barrett an answer right away. The idea of nursing felt foreign. I'd spent the past year trying to disappear. Now he was asking me to step directly into people's lives, to hold their hands in pain, to look into their eyes in fear, to become part of their healing. Could I really do that when I was still healing myself? Still, the seed had been planted, and like most things that take root quietly, it grew faster than I expected. 3 weeks after that storm, I drove myself, hands sweating on the steering wheel, to the hospital in Stamford and walked through the front doors of St. Mary's Medical Center. The admissions counselor, a woman named Claire with crow's feet and calm eyes, handed me a brochure and said, "You're not too late for spring enrollment. Just in time." Actually, I stood there for a moment, fingers brushing the edge of the paper. The nursing school seal, embossed in navy blue, shimmered under the fluorescent lights. "Is there an age limit?" I asked. Claire smiled kindly. "There's no expiration date on compassion." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my parents and told them I was enrolling in the nursing program. My mother's eyes filled with quiet worry. My father grunted, then nodded once his version of wholehearted support. "I'm proud of you," he said, not looking up from his soup. I blinked. That was all I needed. Classes began in early March. I commuted 20 minutes from Greenwich to Stamford 4 days a week, catching the early train when I could, or driving through morning fog with my thermos of coffee. The coursework was brutal anatomy, pharmacology, emergency care, but for the first time in what felt like forever, I had something to pour myself into, something real, something that demanded all of me. There was no time to wallow in heartbreak when I was memorizing every bone in the human body. No room for bitterness when I was practicing how to start an IV or dress a wound. No energy left to cry at night after 10 hours of clinical rotations, 2 exams, and a quiz on cardiac rhythms. My hands, once soft and idle, grew calloused and steady. My voice, once timid, became firm and clear, and my heart, once shattered, began to knit itself back together, not perfectly, not seamlessly, but strong in the places where it had cracked. I found that I was good at this, not just competent, but naturally attuned to pain, to subtle signs, to what people weren't saying. There was a quiet power in holding someone's hand as they slipped into sleep before surgery, or in brushing a mother's hair off her sweaty forehead after labor. I'd been on the other side of helplessness. I knew what it felt like to be alone in a room full of people. Maybe that was why I refused to let any patient of mine feel unseen. My instructors noticed. "You have an instinct," one of them told me. During my second semester, "You'll go far. Donna, you belong in this field." Belonging. That word hadn't touched my life in a long time. By the fall of 1970, I had completed my certification and was offered a position at St. Mary's in the maternity ward. I accepted without hesitation. It was ironic, in a way. I had been the bride left behind, the woman who never had children, and now I was helping others bring new life into the world every single day. But there was something healing about it. Each time I swaddled a newborn or watched a father cry the first time he held his child, a little more of the weight inside me lifted. The pain didn't disappear. It never truly does, but it softened, made room for something new. I rented a small walk-up apartment near the hospital. My mother worried at first. "Greenwich isn't that far," she said, folding towels in the living room. "You could just stay here. The house is quiet without you." "I need to stand on my own," I told her gently. She looked at me for a long moment, then kissed my forehead. "Just promise me you'll come home on Sundays." I did, and I always brought pie. Those early years at St. Mary's were full of long shifts, aching feet, and moments that changed me forever. I held hands with teenage girls giving birth in secret. I comforted women grieving miscarriages. I celebrated life's most joyous moments and bore witness to its most painful ones. And somewhere amid all of that, I met Dr. Samuel Harris. He was older than me by 10 years, a quiet, soft-spoken man with deep-set eyes and a laugh that snuck up on you. He was the attending physician for the neonatal unit Precise, brilliant, and a little aloof. But over time, we found ourselves gravitating toward each other in the staff lounge during late-night shifts or over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. He never asked about my past, never pried, but he listened when I spoke, and that silence, the safe kind, was something I hadn't known I needed. One evening, after we'd both finished a double shift, I found him standing outside the hospital under a flickering street lamp, his coat collar turned up against the October chill. "Donna," he said, "you ever think about what comes next?" I smiled tiredly. "This patience, work, more work." "No," he said, his breath visible in the air. "I mean beyond that." I didn't have an answer. Not then. But his question stayed with me. What did come next? I had survived heartbreak. I had rebuilt a life. I had found purpose in a job that demanded my full heart. But I had yet to open that heart again, to love, to risk, to believe in connection. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Still, the question lingered, whispering in the back of my mind as the months passed and the seasons changed, as winter came, and with it a storm unlike any I'd seen before. I didn't yet know that my next great chapter, my most unexpected and life-changing one, was about to arrive in the form of a little girl with dark hair and eyes too sad for someone so small. Her name was Emily. But that's a story for tomorrow. It was the spring of 1972 when Emily came into my life. The accident happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A school bus returning from a field trip to a nature center upstate lost control on a slick curve and crashed into the ravine near Hooper's Creek. The news came in waves, first whispers from paramedics, then radio alerts, Then the piercing sound of multiple ambulances converging on St. Mary's. I was midway through my shift in the maternity ward when we were told to assist with emergency overflow. Every nurse on staff was called in. The halls became a blur of gurneys, stretchers, wet coats, blood-soaked gauze, and muffled sobs. Most of the children sustained minor injuries, broken bones, bruises, concussions, but a few were far worse off. That's when I first saw her. She was lying unconscious on a narrow cot pushed against the hallway wall, small, fragile, barely 10 years old, with tangled dark hair matted to her cheeks and a long, deep gash down the side of her face. She looked like a broken doll someone had forgotten to love. Her chart said Emily Brooks, internal bleeding, broken femur, possible head trauma. Her grandmother had suffered a heart attack upon hearing the news and was pronounced dead before she reached the hospital. She has no one, the social worker said quietly. No parents, no siblings, just the grandmother. We're contacting the state to arrange foster placement once she's stable. I nodded, but something inside me rebelled. I didn't even know this child, but the thought of her waking up to strangers in a strange home, still in pain, filled me with an ache I hadn't felt in years. That night, after Emily came out of surgery, I volunteered to sit with her. I brought a children's book from the hospital library and a small lavender pillow one of the maternity moms had donated weeks before. I sat by her side, hour after hour, reading aloud to the room, even though she never stirred. 3 days later, her eyes fluttered open. She didn't speak at first, just blinked up at me with the kind of haunted stillness I'd seen in combat veterans. When I offered her ice chips, she looked away. When I adjusted her blanket, she flinched, but I kept coming back. During breaks, I'd read her stories, brush her hair gently with a soft comb, and hum little lullabies my mother used to sing to me. I didn't know what I was doing exactly. I just knew she shouldn't feel alone. It was during one of those late-night shifts, while I was sitting beside her drawing cats on the edges of her menu card, that she finally whispered, "What happens now?" I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She stared straight ahead. "They said I don't have any family." So what happens now? I didn't have an answer. I'd spent my entire career learning how to stop bleeding, lower fevers, deliver babies, but I'd never trained for this moment when a child asks what becomes of her when the people who love her are all gone. Before I could speak, the social worker walked in, carrying a clipboard and talking in that overly bright voice professionals use when they're afraid of scaring a child. "We're looking into a few foster options," she said. "Nothing is final yet, but we'll find you a good home." Emily turned her face toward the wall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead, and all I could see was Emily's face, that brave little girl hiding a storm behind her silence. I thought about how I'd felt 4 years ago, abandoned, unwanted, like everything secure had been ripped away. I was an adult and barely survived it. She was only 10. The next morning, without fully thinking it through, I walked into the social worker's office and said, "What if she stayed with me?" She blinked. "You just until she recovers. Just until there's a better plan." The look she gave me was polite but skeptical. "Miss Thomas, you're single. You work full-time. You don't have any experience raising children." "I know," I said quietly, "but I understand what it means to lose everything in a single day." She didn't agree, not at first. There were protocols, Hearings, home inspections, endless paperwork. My apartment was deemed too small, too temporary. My age and marital status were flagged. It took weeks of pleading, referrals from the hospital, and an unexpected letter of support from Dr. Harris before the temporary guardianship was granted. I moved out of my one-bedroom and into a modest two-bedroom cottage a few blocks from the school. I bought a second-hand bed, painted the walls pale yellow, and sewed little curtains for her room using a floral fabric my mother had saved. I didn't know if she'd like flowers. I just wanted it to feel warm. The first night she stayed with me, she barely said a word, but she didn't cry. The second night, I found her curled on the hallway floor, outside my room. I picked her up and carried her back to bed. "Are you scared?" I asked. She nodded. "Me too," I whispered, "but we'll figure this out. Together." It wasn't easy. She had nightmares. Sometimes she screamed in the middle of the night. Other times she shut down for days, unable to speak more than a few words. Her leg, though healing, still ached when the weather turned cold. She limped. She avoided the other kids at recess. She flinched when someone hugged her too quickly, but we built a routine. Mornings with oatmeal and orange juice, afternoons with spelling homework and stories, evenings watching sitcoms and baking banana bread. Slowly, cautiously, a rhythm formed. One evening, as I tucked her in and smoothed her hair back, she asked in a whisper, "How long do I stay?" I hesitated. "As long as you need to." I didn't tell her yet that I was already applying to adopt her, that the thought of her leaving me one day had begun to gnaw at my insides like a fear I couldn't name. I didn't tell her how fiercely I'd come to love her, not as a stand-in for the life I'd lost, but as someone entirely new, entirely hers. In May of 1974, the adoption was finalized. Emily Brooks became Emily Thomas. The judge smiled as he stamped the order, and the courtroom erupted in quiet applause. My parents were there. So was Dr. Harris. Even Mrs. Whitman sent a bouquet. I knelt beside Emily, pulled her into a hug, and whispered, "You were never just a chapter, sweetheart. You're the whole story." She looked up at me then, her eyes steady, and said the first full sentence I'd heard her speak in days. "I think I want to stay forever." And so she did. Life settled into a rhythm after the adoption, gentle, imperfect, and beautifully ordinary. Emily and I found our own kind of normal in that little yellow cottage on Sycamore Street. It was small, only 2 bedrooms and a galley kitchen, with windows that fogged up every time I boiled water. But it was ours. The walls echoed with new sounds, her giggles during Saturday morning pancakes, her sleepy footsteps padding across the floor late at night, and, eventually, the music of piano practice drifting in from the living room. She called me Mom for the first time while tying her shoelaces. It was a Tuesday morning, a month after the court finalized the adoption. She was running late, wrestling with her backpack, her ponytail crooked. I was helping her stuff her lunch into a brown paper bag when she looked up and said casually, "Mom, I forgot my gym shoes." I froze, not because I was surprised, but because of the ease in her voice, the comfort, the safety, the trust. That one word undid me. I had never expected to be a mother. After Alan, I assumed that door had closed forever. But Emily wounded, wise beyond her years, Emily had found her way into my life, like a flower pushing through cracked pavement. And I realized I hadn't just saved her. She was saving me, too. Motherhood, I learned quickly, was both harder and more rewarding than any nursing shift I'd ever endured. There were school concerts where she forgot the lyrics and burst into tears, science projects that nearly set the kitchen on fire, playground squabbles and growing pains, and sleepless nights over fevers that wouldn't break. There were also first snow angels, first A+ on a spelling test, first whispered, "I love you," as she drifted off in the dark. Every little milestone was a miracle I hadn't dared dream for myself. Meanwhile, my career continued to bloom. I moved into a supervisory role in the maternity ward, training younger nurses and organizing prenatal programs for underserved families. The hospital became not just a workplace, but a home of its own. And to my surprise, I began to receive recognition not for surviving a tragedy, but for building something from it. People no longer saw me as the woman left at the altar. They saw Nurse Thomas, Emily's mom, the woman who had turned a broken heart into open arms. In time, Emily began to thrive. The limp in her leg faded with therapy. The night terrors slowly gave way to restless dreams, then peaceful sleep. She joined the school choir, became a fierce reader, started talking about becoming a teacher. But healing is never a straight line. There were moments sudden and sharp when the past resurfaced. Once, in the grocery store, we passed a man in a gray coat. He looked vaguely like Emily's late grandfather. She froze, clutching the edge of my sweater, her eyes wide and unblinking. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're safe. Another time, during a thunderstorm." She crawled into my bed and whispered, "Will you promise not to leave?" Ever I held her close and whispered back, "Forever, Emily, you and me, always." Outside our little bubble, the world was changing. Vietnam was ending. The hospital started receiving grants for new women's health initiatives. Greenwich began to grow new developments, new families, new faces. But in our home, the core remained the same love, consistency, safety. Dr. Samuel Harris remained a quiet presence in our lives. Dinners at the diner, friendly visits during holidays, a steady rock I leaned on more times than I could count. He never pushed, never crossed boundaries, just remained there. One evening, when Emily was about 11, she asked him point blank across the dinner table, "Why don't you ever stay overnight like other dads I nearly choked on my iced tea?" He chuckled, calm as ever. "Because your mom is one of the most independent women I've ever met," he said, smiling gently. "And some things take time." Emily nodded, as if that answered everything. Time passed in the quiet ways it always does. Seasons shifted. Birthdays came and went. My hair grayed. Emily grew taller. Her voice changed. Her laugh deepened. One morning, she stood in front of me wearing a new coat, and I realized she wasn't a little girl anymore. She was nearly a woman. We'd come so far from that hospital room. We weren't perfect, but we were whole. And every so often, usually in the stillness of evening, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching Emily through the window as she worked on her homework or talked on the phone with a friend. And I would think to myself, this is the life I was meant to have, not the one I planned, not the one I lost, but the one I built with open hands, with hard-earned grace, and with a heart that chose to keep loving despite everything. It was a rainy Thursday in April, exactly 15 years, 10 months, and 3 days since Alan Brooks had vanished from my life when I saw him again. I had just finished a late shift at the hospital and was pulling into the driveway, windshield wipers squeaking against a steady spring drizzle. Emily was away at college in Boston, finishing up her sophomore year. The house felt emptier with her gone, though I'd grown to enjoy the quiet, the slower pace of an evening spent with a cup of tea and a good book. But that evening, as I rounded the bend at the end of Sycamore Street, I spotted a car parked in front of my house, a sleek black sedan, unfamiliar. And on the front steps, soaking wet beneath the porch light, sat a man in a dark suit, head bowed, hands clasped, a suitcase at his side. Even before I fully parked the car, my heart started pounding. It couldn't be, but it was. Alan Brooks, older, grayer, weathered in the way only time and regret can age a man. I froze at the edge of the walkway, umbrella hanging uselessly at my side as rain soaked through my scrubs. He stood slowly, his joints stiff, his expensive shoes splattered with mud. His face, once boyish and warm, was lined, hollowed. But the eyes were the same deep-set, familiar, and haunted. "Hello? Donna?" he said, voice rougher than I remembered. I didn't answer. I walked past him, up the steps, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I didn't shut the door behind me. Old habits. He took that as an invitation and followed, cautiously, like a man afraid of ghosts. And perhaps, in some way, he was. The living room was just as he had never seen it, photographs of Emily at every stage of her life, a crocheted blanket over the arm of the couch, a stack of nursing journals by the coffee table. He stared at one photo in particular, Emily at 16, grinning beneath a banner that read, "Honor Roll." He pointed to it. "Your daughter. Yes." My voice was flat. I wasn't going to offer more. He nodded and sat down slowly, setting his briefcase by his feet. I stayed standing. "You look well," he said. I let out a hollow laugh. "You didn't come all this way to comment on my appearance. Alan, what do you want?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it gently on the coffee table. "My wife passed away," he said quietly, 3 months ago. "Cancer." "I'm sorry," I replied automatically, not out of politeness, but because I knew what it was to lose. He nodded once. "Her name was Rebecca. We were married 15 years, no children. I waited. When she was dying, she made me promise to make things right." He said, "To tell you the truth, the whole truth." I stared at him, cold, silent. The day before our wedding, he continued, "I received a package. A man delivered it to my apartment, said he worked for Harold Whitaker. That name landed like a weight in the room. Harold Whitaker had owned half of Greenwich back then, the textile mill, the bank, the newspaper. He was known for his philanthropy and his ruthlessness." Alan opened the envelope and slid a stack of aged papers across the table. "There were photos," he said, "of your mother with Harold, compromising photos. There were bank statements, too, claiming your father had been embezzling money from the mill. The message was clear: if I married you, the evidence would be made public. Your father would be arrested, your mother disgraced." My legs went numb. He continued. I didn't believe it. At first, I confronted Harold, told him I'd go to the police. He laughed, told me he owned the police. He said he'd ruin your family, and me with them, unless I walked away. I sank into the armchair across from him, trembling. "You could have told me," I said, voice cracking. "We could have faced it together." "They made it clear," he said, looking down at his hands. "If I warned you, they'd release everything. No time to plan. No way to shield you. I had 48 hours to disappear or destroy your entire family. So you disappeared," I whispered. He nodded. "I thought I was protecting you." I stared at the documents, old, yellowed, still bearing the fingerprints of lies. I thought I'd spared you, he said. I told myself that over and over. And then I couldn't undo it. I couldn't face you. So I ran harder, got married, built a life, but I never stopped thinking about you. My hands clenched the arms of the chair. And the letter you left me, that cold, heartless note. He looked up, shame in every corner of his face. That was Whitaker's idea. He thought it would help you move on, make you hate me, make it cleaner. I laughed a bitter, broken sound. It worked. I know. Silence settled like fog. Then he opened the briefcase and pulled out a second envelope, newer, less weathered. I found this after Whitaker died. He passed 6 weeks ago. I went through his files. These he pushed forward. Another set of documents were forgeries. The photos were staged. The financial records fakes. Your parents were innocent. The room tilted. My lungs forgot how to breathe. I stood, walked to the fireplace, pressed a hand to the mantel to steady myself. 15 years, I said softly. 15 years of thinking I wasn't enough, that you didn't love me enough to show up, that I was abandoned because I was unworthy. He rose slowly. You were never unworthy, Donna. You were everything right in my life. I turned to face him, tears spilling freely now, and yet you let me believe otherwise. You let me build a life on that lie. He nodded. I did, and I'm sorry, more than you'll ever know. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to collapse into his arms. Instead, I whispered, "Get out." He hesitated. "Please," I said. He gathered the papers, left the envelope behind, and walked to the door. "I'm staying at the Maplewood Inn," he said, "for a few days, if you ever want to talk again." Then he left. The door closed behind him. And I sat down on the couch and cried harder than I had in 15 years, not just for the pain he caused, but for the life I might have had, and for the woman I'd become without him. That night, sleep did not come. I sat in the kitchen long after the rain had stopped, Alan's envelope in front of me, unopened. My tea had gone cold. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a second skin, and still I couldn't shake the sound of his voice from my head. You were everything right in my life. The words should have meant something, and maybe they did 15 years ago, but now they just made me tired. By morning, the ache had settled in my chest like a stone, not just the weight of his betrayal, but the realization that my entire adult life had been shaped by it, by a lie told in the name of protection, perhaps, but a lie all the same. I stared out the window, watching robins peck at the damp soil in the garden bed. The lilac bushes were just beginning to bloom. It was the kind of morning I used to cherish, but now the beauty felt distant, like I was watching life through a pane of glass. When I heard the front door open a few hours later, I tensed. It was only Emily. "Mom," she called out. "Why is there a strange man sitting in a car outside the house?" I froze. She stepped into the kitchen, eyebrows raised, tall, gray-haired, suit. "He's been there since I pulled in." "Is he lost?" I took a breath. "No, he's not lost." She frowned. "Okay, so who is he?" I looked at her, my daughter, now nearly a woman, strong, intelligent, with the same fierce loyalty I'd seen in her since she was 10. I had kept this part of my story tucked away for so long, convinced it no longer mattered. But it did, and she deserved the truth. "His name is Alan Brooks," I said quietly. He was my fiancé, the man I was supposed to marry before you came into my life. Her eyes widened. The one who left you at the altar, I nodded. She pulled out a chair, sat down slowly, and now he's back. He says he was blackmailed into leaving. I told her. He says he did it to protect me. And you believe him? I paused. I believe he believes it. And I believe the evidence he brought with him. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want to do? I didn't have an answer. Later that afternoon, I drove to the First Baptist Church, the same one where I was left standing alone in a white dress all those years ago. Reverend Hughes had long since retired. A younger man had taken his place, a gentle, thoughtful soul who had once visited my clinic to bless new mothers in recovery. I sat at the back of the empty sanctuary, sunlight pouring through the stained glass, casting a kaleidoscope of color across the worn pews. The young reverend found me there, hands folded in my lap. Alan's envelope unopened beside me. Ms. Thomas, he said kindly. Are you all right? I'm not sure. I admitted. I'm trying to figure out what forgiveness looks like, the kind that's not simple. He nodded and sat beside me. Forgiveness, he said gently, isn't a gift you give the other person. It's a gift you give yourself. It's how you lay down the burden you were never meant to carry in the first place. I didn't say anything, but the words burrowed deep. That night, I opened the envelope. Inside were the photographs Alan had shown me, the fakes Whitaker used to manipulate him. And on top of them, a note in Alan's handwriting. Whatever you decide, I hope you find peace. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I gathered the entire envelope, the lies, the truth, the proof, and I walked them to the fireplace. One by one, I fed each page to the flames, not in anger, not for revenge, but because I refused to let them define me any longer. I wasn't the woman who got left. I wasn't the abandoned bride. I was the woman who raised a daughter with her own 2 hands, who helped bring life into the world day after day, who built clinics, comforted the dying, and sat through countless nights by hospital beds, who chose love even after loss. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant choosing myself. The next morning, I called the Maplewood Inn. Can you let Mr. Alan Brooks know I'd like to meet him at the community center? I asked. The receptionist hesitated, then said, Of course, Ms. Thomas. I hung up the phone. My hands were steady. I didn't know yet what I would say, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready. Not to rewrite history, but to close the chapter on my terms. The old Greenwich Community Center still smelled like floor wax and old paper. Its hallway was lined with framed photographs, Boy Scout troops from the 60s, ribbon cuttings from long-forgotten events, and community cook-offs where everyone knew each other's pie by taste alone. That's where I took Alan. He arrived 5 minutes late, slightly winded from rushing in the rain. He carried no briefcase this time, no envelope, just himself, and a look that hovered between remorse and awe. I didn't expect to be here again, he said softly. I didn't expect to invite you, I replied. We walked in silence past the display cases and down the corridor until we reached the West Wing. I stopped in front of a large photograph from 1978 me in a navy blue dress, cutting a red ribbon in front of a modest building with a hand-painted sign, Greenwich Free Clinic. Behind me, a small crowd cheered. Emily stood just off frame, holding a bouquet that nearly swallowed her arms. This was the first thing I built after you left, I said quietly. A clinic for people who couldn't afford the hospital. I worked double shifts. I begged for grants, and we've kept it open every year since. Alan stared at the photo. You turned grief into grace. I nodded. It took time. It took help. But I never let what happened to me stop me from helping someone else. We moved on to the next wall, where a new display had recently been added. In it was a photograph of Emily at 16, surrounded by younger children holding art supplies and notebooks. Above it, a banner read, Greenwich Youth Support Program. She started this one herself. I said, after everything she went through, she wanted kids like her to have a place to talk, to feel safe, to be seen. Alan blinked rapidly, overcome. She's incredible. She is, I agreed. We stood there a long time before I turned to him. I needed you to see this not to impress you, not for closure, but because if we're going to talk about forgiveness, you need to understand what I did with the pain you left me. He nodded slowly. It wasn't in vain. No, I said, but it wasn't because of you either. It was in spite of you. He didn't argue. That humility, that recognition softened something in me. I still own my grandfather's land just outside town, he said after a pause. Whitaker never got his hands on it. I raised an eyebrow. You kept it. I couldn't bring myself to sell it, he said. Rebecca always said it should be used for something meaningful. Before she died, she made me promise to do something with it, something healing. He looked at me carefully. I want to build a retreat center for veterans, troubled youth, survivors of loss, a place to rest, to rebuild. I can provide the land and the funding, but I don't know how to make it real, not alone. I stared at him, uncertain. And you're asking me? What exactly I'm asking if you'd help me build it? As a partner, not for the past, not to fix it, but to create something better with what's left. The idea hung in the air heavy, wild, unexpected. My instinct was to say no. It was easier to keep the past in a neat box, to carry my grief like a badge of honor. But then I thought of the kids at Emily's program, and the women at the clinic, and the patients I'd sat beside in quiet rooms with nothing but hope between us. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing a new way forward. I'll think about it, I said. Over the following weeks, we met at the town office, at the site, over coffee at the diner. We talked logistics, zoning, architecture, programming. He was careful, professional, respectful of my space. People in town began to notice. Whispers stirred again. But this time, they weren't full of pity. They were full of curiosity. By October, the plans were finalized. By November, we broke ground. The Brooks Thomas Healing Retreat, his name, mine, side by side. A tribute not to romance, but to resilience. And slowly, carefully, something began to change. We weren't the same people we'd once been young, naive, full of fragile dreams. We were older now, wiser, and shaped by pain in ways that didn't need fixing, only understanding. At the site, surrounded by sawdust and scaffolding, Alan said one day, "You've always been the strongest person I've known." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, saw not the man who left me, but the man who returned and took responsibility. Strength, I said, isn't in what you survive. It's in what you build after. And together, that's what we were doing, brick by brick. June 12th, 1983, 15 years to the day since I waited at the altar. The doors of the Brooks Thomas Healing Retreat swung open to the community of Greenwich. But this time, I wasn't a bride left behind. I was a woman standing tall, shoulder to shoulder with the very man who once broke my heart and who now helped me build something so much bigger than either of us. The sun was warm. The skies were clear, almost eerily similar to that long ago wedding day. But unlike then, I didn't tremble. I didn't doubt. I didn't hope for someone to show up. I had shown up for myself. Emily stood beside me, radiant in a sapphire blue dress that reminded me of her as a child. She had returned from Boston just to help with the opening gala. Now 21. She greeted guests with ease, her voice full of quiet confidence. She had once asked me if there was still something between Alan and me. That night, I had told her no. Now I wasn't so sure. Love at 75 doesn't look like it does at 21. It doesn't carry promises of forever or fairy tales. It's quiet. It's earned. It's tender and full of pauses and history. Maybe that was enough. The ceremony was simple. A modest podium, folding chairs under white tents, neighbors, hospital staff, donors, veterans, families, survivors. People we'd built this place for people who carried pain in their pockets and still found the courage to get out of bed each day. Alan stood before the crowd and spoke with grace I hadn't seen in him when we were younger. 15 years ago, he began, I made a terrible decision, one born from fear and lies. But tonight, I don't want to dwell on that. I want to honor what came after what Donna Thomas did with the pain I left her holding. She built a life. She built a daughter. She built a legacy. He paused, eyes glassy. And now, she's helped build this. He gestured to the retreat behind us, newly painted, full of light, with trails winding into the trees and rooms waiting to hold healing. To second chances, he said, raising his glass. To Donna. The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it, because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about applause. I was thinking about the winding road that brought me here from the church pew to the hospital ward, from heartbreak to healing. After the ceremony, I found a quiet spot on the back porch of the retreat. Emily came and sat beside me, our shoulders touching. You did it. Mom, she said. No. I corrected gently. We did it. She smiled. Alan joined us later, carrying 3 mugs of coffee, just the way I liked it, 1 sugar, no cream. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just sat there, watching the sun set over the trees, letting the silence carry everything we couldn't say. If you've walked this far with me, here's what I hope you remember. It's not the heartbreak that defines you. It's what you build after. You can't control who walks away. You can't erase the scars, but you can choose to keep going. You can build a life out of the pieces. You can find purpose in the pain. And sometimes when you least expect it, the life you create will be even more beautiful than the one you lost. I used to think being left at the altar was the end of my story, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of a life I never imagined. A life filled with service, with community, with a daughter who saved me just as much as I saved her. And yes, maybe even with forgiveness. So, if you're standing in the ashes of something broken, remember this. The fire that burned your old life down may be the same one that forges your strength. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you? What helped you move forward? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories from women like me, mothers, grandmothers, daughters who faced the hardest storms and found their way through. There's more to come, more hope, more truth, more healing. Until next time, this is Donna Thomas, sending love and strength from my heart to yours.